blocking people's view of the text on the slides, but if I do get in your way, please let me know. And this is unusual context for me because I'm not usually working in the early modern period. I'm more medievalist, but this is medieval plus Viking Age to reception, or even pre-Viking Age. So when one thinks about countries that have runic inscriptions, one doesn't usually think of Poland, but there have been found several inscriptions from the migration period, so 3rd through 7th centuries, and from the Viking Age in areas that are currently in Poland or that at some point have belonged to Poland. And of course, since archaeological entities are not the same as modern day states and boundaries move, then areas in Germany and Ukraine would form part of the same cultural areas in earlier times. There are also some imported and some modern inscriptions. And there's also a sort of very lively reception of runes in Poland that includes speculation about Slavs using runes, some interpretations of runic inscriptions as containing Slavic elements. And this was mainstream scholarship up until the First World War and independence, and then it's been kind of alternative New Age discourses since then, but it's kind of coming back in the light of new finds and of changing views of Vikings. And this is part of the longstanding and ongoing debate about the role of Scandinavians in the early history of Poland, which has been gone back and forth. And of course, we have the discussion of the Viking Age is filtered through the experience of the early modern period and also the experience of the 20th century. And then at the end, I'll talk a little bit about Finland. So Krafka gives a kind of overview of runic finds from Poland, which include some inscriptions from the Elder Futhark, and then some from the Viking Age. And then in the later times, we have speculative connections to heraldry and other symbols and some imported and modern objects. And I'll go through these one by one. But these ideas of connections to heraldry are also pervasive vernacular practice. I don't really see any runes in the Silesian eagle, but it's in the eye of the beholder. So we do have a few bracteates from the migration period. These are thin coins that are stamped on one side, used for decoration. And this style is often considered to be a representation of Odin riding on the eight-legged horse Sleipnir. And this one says Zabar, which is considered to be uninterpreted now. But in 1906, Lechejewski interpreted it as a Polish masculine name, Zabaw. Sounds like fun. The oldest attestation of Polish, although this has not been accepted by later scholarship. It's in a museum in Berlin. There are other bracteates have been found that are possibly have runes. So this symbol could be a runic Z. But the identification as a rune is uncertain. This is a part of a hoard, and there have been other bracteates where the possible runes have been destroyed. There is a hoard found in 2000, or a couple of found in 2006 and 2008. Including 2 bracteates with possible runic inscriptions. This is again the kind of style that is seen as Odin riding on Sleipnir, and a common kind of inscription on them is Oth. We have a variation of this, Oth, maybe, which has not been interpreted. And then the other one has probably the beginning of the runic alphabet, which starts Fu, Eth, Thort, Ar. It's also been interpreted. There's actually a speculation by Anatoly Lieber that this is the reason for the earth, that it represents a kind of dirty word that some of you may recognize. That it could be this obscenity, but Oxford doesn't find that convincing. We do have that word on some later graffiti too. And a third bracteate, which was found in 1990, is also lost, might have come from the same deposit, and these are in Szczecin. a lot of the early inscriptions have been lost. So this was there's a gold ring from a hoard discovered in the 1830s that contained a swastika here and some other symbols, and then alu, which is especially in early Runic inscriptions, is a magic word. It's cognate with the word for beer, but it has other meanings at that time. And unfortunately, the artifact is lost, but this photograph has been preserved. And another inscription that was also lost was in the spearhead from Rozvadov, which appeared to contain a variant of the I am of this tribe formula, but it's not clear what dialect it is, if it's dialect or Vendel. In either way, it contains some unusual features. And then in Ukraine also there was a spearhead found in Kovo, which is used, of course. Kovo was a Polish city, and this is now in Ukraine, and it was looted in 1939 and documented in Berlin in 1940. But then it was taken out of Berlin before the end of World War II, but disappeared. Things disappeared during wars. And it's considered to be Gothic, containing maybe the name of the spear or the name of the owner. We have another more recent find from an area of Western Ukraine that was in Poland during the interwar period that was found 10 years ago, but has also disappeared. Again, things disappear during wartime. That looks to be the 5th century, hard to interpret, but possibly a name in an Eastern Germanic or Gothic form. So those are early finds from Poland and adjacent areas of Western Ukraine. So there's some, again, we have kind of a Pomeranian concentration, but more of a scatter. The Viking Age finds are all from Pomerania, all from areas where we know there was a lot of contact. So there's a bone from Kamień Pomorski that contains possibly a by name, and again, possibly the beginning of either the beginning of the alphabet or this dirty word. We have a game piece from Kaldus that says in Old Norse, Jon owns this game piece. And Jon is, of course, the first Christian name to become common in Scandinavia. And again, this is also a place where you have a lot of Scandinavian presence in the Viking Age. There's also a rune stick found in the foundations of the house in the harbor in Vollen, which of course is Jomsborg. Scandinavian place, but the runes have been damaged, so they're unreadable. It's not clear whether it's letters or some decoration. And I don't know, I couldn't find a picture of it. And when I was in Vollen last year, the museum was closed, and the person who was going to show this to me got sick, so I didn't get to see it. But I'll be back. I've also found mentions of Durham, so Arabic coins with runes added to them from Shelubia and from Shemius, but I couldn't find any details on them. I couldn't find any transcriptions of the inscriptions or pictures, so I don't know if this is something where people first thought there were runes, but then they were not actually runes. So Kravchuk subtitles his article, "Do we need an inventory of Polish runes?" And it seems like we do, because they disappear. But these runic inscriptions from the southern coast of the Baltic and areas that are now Poland and areas that are now Germany give a kind of different picture of Scandinavian Slavic relations than what we get from the written sources. The written sources focus on battles and forced conversions and on the royal alliances between the monarchs. But what we see here is much more everyday peaceful coexistence, and that in these sort of emporia towns, and that it actually doesn't. And Michael Lechenisen says that it actually doesn't look that different from Ireland, where we know that there were lots of peaceful interactions and intermarriages between Scandinavians and Celts. This is a different word. So there have also been, those are the Viking Age inscriptions. There have also been some inscriptions imported in the 19th century in a romantic spirit. So there's runic calendar sticks, which are an early modern phenomenon, a Reformation phenomenon. One of an 18th century calendar stick from Sweden was donated by Henrik Bukowski to the Jagiellonian University Museum, and a younger one to the Museum of Ethnography. And these runestavar are not considered to be runic inscriptions in Scandinavia because the runes are not used as an alphabet, they're used as calendric symbols, but Kraftkut includes them among kinds of runes in Poland as places where people may see or encounter runes. And then there's the inscription in the Vangstave Church, which was a stave church from 1200 from Norway, which was slated for demolition and was moved to Prussia at that time, and is now in Karpacz. And in the portal, there's an inscription that is very badly worn because the way they showed it to tourists was have the tourists run their fingers over it. In the 19th century, so there are more and more run down. So we don't exactly know what it says. There are several interpretations, but it was clearly a curiosity. And then we have modern memorial inscriptions. So Erik den Röde Sandqvist, who's a Swede active in Denmark, carved memorial inscriptions in Volyn and in Runic that are overtly modern. They're not forgeries. Everybody knows they're modern. But commemorating the context and the shared history. And this is part of this kind of interest in Vikings in Poland, which has been a booming area. Long controversy, but it seems like the current trend is yes. So we've gone from Vikingowie w Polsce with question mark to the Vikings in Poland. Leszek Gardella, extremely productive archaeologists, arguing that you had sustained contexts that are mutually beneficial, but then you also have these kind of phantom and possible forgeries, like the supposed find of a Harold Bluetooth's grave with documentation that's all kind of suspect. So the role of Vikings in Polish historiography is not the same as in Russian historiography because they're not mentioned in the earliest chronicles, and then the attitudes towards things Germanic, things Scandinavian over the centuries have influenced a lot how much people have been wanting to see versus wanting not to see Scandinavian influences, and this still goes on. If you listen to archaeologists argue over chamber graves or things as to who's in the grave and what it says about contacts. And we also debated whether they just stayed in Pomerania or how far south, how far inland they made it. Another really fascinating part of the reception of runes in Poland is the connections with pre-Christian Slavic scripts. So there's speculation about Slavic writing before the Glagolitic and Cyrillic scripts. So the monk Hraber, 9th century, mentions lines and cuts, not necessarily used as an alphabet, but used for divination. And there have been, in 19th century at least, there was a lot of speculation that Slavic people had written with runes in earlier times. And this idea was completely mainstream scholarship up until World War I. But then somehow with independence, it wasn't so much debunked as just went out of favor in scholarship, but it went underground and persisted in alternative kind of nationalist and New Age discourses, often with the elements of, how do you define with Slavic runes? And then these some of these older writings have come out of copyright and been reprinted. I believe Lechievsky is now available for free online. I bought a print on demand copy, and this includes rather fanciful interpretations of runic inscriptions from elsewhere as being in Slavic languages. So this Kosakovsky interpreted a runestone from Denmark as being a poem in Polish. So the accepted interpretation is a standard kind of memorial formula with also a curse to the people who carve a formula and the curse to the people who damage the monument. But Kosakowski sees this poem about an epidemic and death and so forth in Polish. This is not the kinds of things that people normally write in runes, although I can see maybe some connection to the Luruk stone if you want. So this is very imaginative, but it's the Lectia Facilior is that the Glavendra stone is in Scandinavian. And the idea of Slavic runes is very much, the patriotism is the idea our ancestors must have been literate. So Koszynski overtly says it's absurd to think that our ancestors were illiterate before Christianity. They can't have been any worse than the other. And what's interesting thing is that this discourse is kind of coming back. There was a find in 2019 of a runic bone fragment in the Czech Republic that has part of a Germanic Futhark, but it's in a completely Slavic context. And so the scholarly writings about this are very careful, saying, well, these are Germanic writing in a Slavic context, but the popular headlines are sort of earliest Slavic writing are runes, so it may be coming back into the discussion, which is also consistent with kind of changing views of Vikings and new emphasis in Old Norse studies on cultural context and hybridity, which is partly a response to the exploitation by the far right and nationalist, racist movements of the Norse past, emphasizing that Viking was a job description, not an ethnicity. Again, Leszek Gadeła has written a lot about Vikings in Poland and Slavic warriors in Denmark in this kind of symbiosis. And then in popular culture and reenactment, people kind of pick and choose their identities to show a much more diverse kind of ways of relating to this past. And there, again, just a couple. I think I have 3 slides. Is that okay? There are a lot of similarities between Finland and Poland in the Viking Age. That the Scandinavian artifacts are concentrated in certain coastal regions, and there are some trade posts or settlements, but not necessarily long-term settlements, and then the archaeological finds support this. So they were in the Viking sphere of influence, but not main areas of conquest or long-term settlement. And the role of the Vikings in modern national identity and heritage narratives has been ambivalent and contested in both scholarly and publications. Last year, I edited a book on runes in Finland, and again, the runic record is also quite similar, that you have a small number of inscriptions recognized as authentic, both scattered from other periods, and one concentration in space and time in southwestern Finland or in Pomerania, and this kind of debate and speculative connections to later forms of epigraphy, and this kind of notions that runes were used to write the majority of languages that circulate in different discourses and kind of modern inscriptions enacting a history that people would like to be right. But there are differences in the time periods of inscriptions. So Poland has some really old and Viking Age inscriptions. Finland has a couple of Viking Age inscriptions, and then mostly, and then late medieval ones from Turku. And of course, there are different histories. And in this kind of occult aspect of the Polish alternative discourse is not so much an interest in Finland. And the Finnish ones, they don't talk about runes being used for Finnish divination. It's more citing supernatural things as a way of proving that the runes were there. But I have a lot of open questions. How can you study literacy and the use of writing when you have just a handful of inscriptions? How were Slavs mutatis mutandis Finns exposed to or familiar with runes, what's the relationship between the Viking Age traditions and the modern traditions? How do these ideas circulate among discourses between scholarly and popular, and also between different national discourses, because it's a very nationalistic discourse of, who our ancestors must have been literate, but you see the same kind of national discourse reproduced in lots of different countries. So what can studying the modern discourse source critically inform work on the archaeological record, and how can comparing Poland and Finland help us in this? So thank you.
Thank you.